In perfect competition, we talked about firms freely entering and exiting the market. And the firms that exit, we ask the question, why do they exit the market? And so in this video, what we're going to talk about is when will the monopolist not produce or not continue in their operations? And to answer this, we have to look at this graphically because it's much easier to look at it graphically. Okay, so we have this demand curve, and we know that the marginal revenue of the monopolist is equal to the partial derivative of the demand curve with respect to Q. And so when we get that, we'll actually find that the marginal revenue is something like this. So it meets the demand curve here at the vertical axis, but then it separates afterwards and looks something like this. And then we have our marginal cost right here. And so we'll just label this MC. And then we have this line, this curve here. We have this curve that we will call our average variable cost, meaning the average cost per unit that the firm incurs. And so I will ask this to you. Will this monopolist continue in operations or not? Well, to answer this, I'll actually give you a few seconds. Okay, so to answer this, we have to see what quantity the firm would produce first. And we know from the previous discussion that the profit maximizing quantity of the firm requires MR equals MC. And where is MR equal to MC? It's at this point. And so the firm would choose a quantity of, let's say, Q star here. And Q star, we know that the firm would now substitute the value of Q star into the inverse demand. So P of Q is equal to something. And so what the firm would do, what the monopolist would do, is he would substitute Q star into the function. So this would be P of Q star is equal to something, and it would be over here. And so the price would be some P star over here. And so will the firm produce, or will the firm continue to operate given this or not? Well, we know that this graph here just represents the revenue of the firm, P times Q. So this whole thing here is the revenue of the firm. But what is the cost of the firm? Well, the cost of the firm, the cost per unit of the firm is here, denoted by AVC. And that's why I labeled it in blue, is because it's an important piece to analyze here. And so at this point, Q star, when the firm produces at Q star, the firm actually incurs, let me change to blue again. Oh, actually, let's use green. The firm actually incurs this much cost. And we'll denote this as C for cost. And so at Q star, the firm gets a revenue of P star times Q star, because revenue is equal to P times Q. And so this would be equal to P star Q star in our case. But it would also incur a cost of C Q star. So C here would be equal to the average variable cost. The average variable cost is actually just equal to total cost over Q times Q. So this is the average cost. This guy here is the average cost multiplied by Q would be equal to our total cost, right? So this is actually our total cost. And so the firm actually loses or incurs a cost of C times Q star, which is this green area over here, which we will shade. It's becoming quite noticeably more confusing. So the actual profit that the firm gets is this part here. So the area between P and C. Actually, let's place a point. Let's label this A. So the cost of the firm, let's label this B. Cost of the firm is area 0 C B Q star. That is the rectangle OCBQ star. The revenue of the firm is P star. Actually, to be consistent, let's start from 0. 0 P star A Q star. That's its revenue. And the profit of the firm is the difference between these two, which is this white area right here, and it's C P star A B. That's the profit of the firm. And so in this case, because profit is actually positive, revenue is actually greater than cost, the firm would continue producing. Now, let's set another graph here. Let's say this is, again, P and Q. So Q here and P here. Again, we have our demand curve that looks like this. Our marginal revenue that looks like this. So this is MR, this is our demand curve. And let's say that we have this marginal cost here, MC here, and an average total cost, an average variable cost, right here. So an average variable cost here. This would be our average variable cost. So let's analyze this again. The firm would choose a quantity where MR is equal to MC. Again, MR equal to MC. This would be here. And so Q would be equal to Q naught. And the price that the firm would choose to set, would be somewhere here, where the demand curve is. And so when we trace that back to the vertical axes, we find P naught. And so the question is, will the firm in this case produce or not? And in this case, the firm, let me answer that, would not produce. And the reason for this is because this here is the revenue, because P times Q is revenue again. And however, the cost of the firm is larger than that. The cost of the firm is here. Let me change the color actually to make it more clear. Let's use blue again. The cost of the firm reaches up to here. Let's label that C. And so the cost in this case is larger than revenue. And so let me set another graph here. Hopefully this would be the last graph. So we have another graph here, P here, and Q here again. So the demand curve, the marginal revenue, I'll just label this MRD, and we have our marginal cost that looks like this, and let me extend that, our marginal cost, which looks like this, our average total cost, which looks like this. Average variable cost, let's make this average variable cost. And then on top of the average variable cost, we also have the fixed cost. Let's say the firm actually rents the place that it needs to produce. And so let's say that the total cost is really large, which makes this large gap here. The total cost, so the average total cost looks something like this. And if we extend our average variable cost the average total cost, which we will label as AC, would actually approach or converge with the average variable cost, but never touch each other. Well, anyway, so in this case, the average variable cost is really low, but the average cost or the average total cost is really high. And so, again, the firm decides to produce at this quantity here. Let me just draw a dotted line up to this top portion here. And so, the revenue of the firm would choose to produce at this point. So that would be Q star and P star here. Let me shade this area here. Shading this area. So this is the revenue of the firm. And so we know that this revenue is greater than the variable cost, which is here. And so this is the variable cost. So we know that the revenue of the firm is greater than the average variable cost. However, when we look here at the average total cost, revenue is actually less than the average total cost. And so now we ask, so let's say that this is cost total and this is cost variable. And so the question now is, will the firm produce or not? The firm in this case, despite the negative profits because of the larger cost compared to revenue, the firm in this case would actually continue producing because the price per unit is greater than, so the price per unit, so P star is actually greater than CV, or the average variable cost. And so the firm would produce. But then the firm actually incurs negative profit, so why would it produce? Well, if it didn't produce, the profit of the firm would actually be even more negative, or the firm would actually lose even greater amounts of money. And so the optimal decision for this firm is to produce to minimize its losses. So the important thing to look at here is actually the price, the quantity, and the variable cost. The total cost does not really affect the decision of the firm to operate or not, because that is a fixed cost which it will incur anyway. So as long as the price or the average revenue, is greater than the average cost, the average variable cost, as long as average revenue is greater than the average variable cost, the firm should produce. Otherwise, Q star would be equal to 0, which means that the firm would not operate, and this would be the optimal decision if average revenue is less than average variable cost.